What we are going to do today is talk about my locals experience yesterday. It's nothing too crazy, but I decided to go to locals for the first time in probably about a year. It's kind of far. It's like 1.5 or 2 hours that it takes me by train to go to locals, which is like kind of so I don't go very often, but I did go yesterday and I was planning on using Purely. So I go through my cards to build my Purely deck, right? And I find my Salamangreat core that I've acquired a couple weeks ago with when the Legendary Duelist came out. And I look at it and I'm like, I kind of think this deck's very fun. It's just locals, right? So why not? I think it was second place. They didn't post standings at the end. I won 3 and had 1 draw. So I got second place and I pulled, even though I decided against Purely, I pulled Pure Lily in my OTS packs, which was very, very nice. I have the deck right here. So I played Salamangreat and I used 3 Salamangreat of Fire. This card is very good. This card is very, very cool. I enjoyed the added consistency of this. 3 Spinnies. This is standard. The one thing that's not so standard is I decided to play 3 Foxies. I really like this card. I think Foxy is in a very nice spot. I played Flame Buffalo as well, but I don't think Foxy clashes very much with other normal summons, because if you draw too many Salamangreats, Foxy is good because it can pitch those Salamangreats from your hand. And if you draw not that many Salamangreats, you can just normal summon it and use its effect. I like Foxy, but you could cut this down to 2. I'd be okay with cutting it down to 2. I just wanted a high amount of good discards for Buffalo. That's why I played 3 Foxies. And then I played 1 Jaguar. I decided to against playing Desires for this. 1 Falco. This honestly might not be necessary. When this came up, it felt like so much like a bonus. And then you play 1 Gazelle, sadly, and then 1 Weasel. This card was actually very nice. This was the most enjoyable card yesterday. Like, the amount of times I went like, make Sunlight Wolf and then give them something to the zone where Sunlight Wolf points, so I get to add back a card with Sunlight Wolf and draw a card with Weasel. And then also later on, I would give them Gazelle or Salamangreat of Fire. Then I would make a Mirage Stelio. I would bounce it back to my hand for like... This was very, very cool. I enjoyed this card a lot. And then I also played 3 Buffalos because go big or go home, I guess. This card only clashes with Salamangreat of Fire, and I think it's kind of like a first world problem. I'd rather draw both of these than none of them. That was my idea. Yeah, and then for the rest of the engine, you play 3 Circle, of course. I think 1 Will is fine. It's only really good when you can already play. It does help you play through Book of Moon. That was one thing I noticed, is that there was one game where my opponent just Book of Mooned my normal summon, and that was it, right? And so this card can help you with that. Another card that can help with that is Salamangreat Tiger as well. Like, if you normal summon... I didn't play Salamangreat Tiger, but like if you go normal summon Salamangreat of Fire and you're afraid that your opponent might have a Book of Moon, you could grab something like Tiger. But you would obviously have to have Gazelle in your hand already for that to be worth it. And then 1 Sanctuary. I drew this card out of 8 games that I played yesterday because I 2-0'd round 1, I 2-0'd round 2, 1-1 draw in round 3, and then I 2-0'd round 4. 8 games total. Opened this 3 times. The last 3 games of the day I opened Sanctuary. It started out really well. Didn't draw it for the first 5 games. Then the last 3 in a row, I drew it. Anyways, just 2 Signet Minings. This should probably be 3. This card was really nice, but I didn't have room for it. And then 1 of each trap. And then for non-engine, I decided to go very hand trap heavy with Salamangreat because I felt like this deck going first, it doesn't make the most oppressive board. This is more like a tier 2 strategy because it's very fair. It has a good grind game. It's very fun to play, but its end board is not super strong. Like, even like very good hands will end on like both of the traps. And that's about it. So I figured pairing that up with a couple hand traps was nice. So I decided to play Ash. Obviously, this is the best one because you can recycle it with Sunlight Wolf. Did that a lot. When you get into a grind game and Ash Blossom is involved, it's really nice because 1 Sunlight Wolf every turn will reset Ash and a trap card. It's very hard to outgrind this deck in a situation like this. I played 3 Nibs and 3 Drolls. These were the bane of my Mannadium opponent's existence because I played against Mannadium round 1 and I played against Mannadium round 2 and they did not have fun. And 3 Imperms. So 12 hand traps. I didn't want to go in with completely without an Arise Heart out, so I played Book of Moon. This card is just very good in general right now. It's like all those cards are relatively popular this format for a very good reason. The cool thing about Salamangreat is that it gets to play all of them together, right? It flows very well. You just need those, and then you need 1 Signet Mining or Gazelle or like Salamangreat of Fire, and you're good to go, right? That's the deck, basically. And then 2 Sunlight Wolves, 3 Balinks, 2 Phoenix, and 1 Heatleo. This is kind of like enough. In some of the grind games, I did run out of these. Like, I had a 40-minute game 1 against Despia. My extra deck was down to 2 cards, and then I won. You could arguably play a third Sunlight Wolf. I never missed the second Helio. Link Decoder, I made this a couple times. It's not super broken, but it's good. It helps you get into access code easier. Splash Mage, I made this a bunch of times. This one I never made, funnily enough, and I've seen some deck profiles who say that they also have never made it. I'd probably leave it here for now, because the option is good, but you could bring back the third Sunlight Wolf. I definitely missed the third Sunlight Wolf more often than I made this, this was 0 times. The third Sunlight Wolf I would have made a couple times. Transcode is phenomenal. Heat Soul is phenomenal. Access code is obviously great. And then there's Mirage Stallion. Literally one flex spot, which is this. Everything else I feel like is necessary. The side deck is kind of like a thrown together kind of thing. I played Kurikaras, which if you want to build this deck on a budget, honestly, the only things that are money in my list, I'm pretty sure, are the Salamangreat of Fire a little bit and the Access Code Talker. You need those. These you can replace. Like if you're trying to build this on a budget, which I'm pretty sure you can. Like for a budget deck, I think this deck is very solid. I don't think it's a top meta contender right now, but as a budget option, I could see it. In that case, you would probably cut Kurikara for a different answer to like a Rysart and purely Noir, like a Kaiju. Kaiju is actually not terrible in this deck because you can bounce it with Mirage Stallion. So like you could play a Kaiju instead. I played 3 Bells for like Labyrinth and Branded. I sided these in against Vanadium simply because going second, I wanted to have more hand traps, and I sided out books for Ghost Bells. I'm not even sure if that was super smart, but it's the only other hand trap I had in the side deck, so there we go. Lightning Storm, Feather Duster, because I was very, very nervous about Book of Moon and Book of Eclipse. You know, this deck, most of the time, if it gets booked, it'll pass, which is one reason why I wouldn't bring this to a very big tournament in this format. It's not very good against books, and that's why I felt like back row removal was necessary. The same is true for evenly. It's like if your opponent makes a board and has books, you will just evenly them, and they will probably not keep the books, so that's good. And then I sided 3 Karma Cannon for going first. I figured that would be the best card for going first over D-Barrier, because I've seen a lot of people run cross out for D-Barrier, and that's why I wanted to have Karma Cannons, because Purely is not very good at playing through Karma Cannon. The side deck is kind of arbitrary. I just threw it together. I went through my cards yesterday and I was like, yeah, these make sense. So that was that. I liked it. It was very fun. So like I said, round 1 I played against Vanadium. I lost the dice roll but opened 2 hand traps in game 1, which was, I believe, Ash Imperm, and that was enough to stop their turn. And then in game 2 I opened Droll Lockbird, which was alone enough to end their turn. And then round 2 was Vanadium again. This time I went first. Going first against Vanadium was actually quite easy, I would say. Like I opened a solid hand and they could not play through it. It was not just the Salamangreat combo. I opened Salamangreat combo plus Nib, and they started playing into my Salamangreat interruptions, and then eventually I just nibbed them and it was over. Game 2, in that game, I opened insane. I opened Madness. I opened Ash, Imperm, Nib, Salamangreat of Fire, and Signet Mining. And then I top decked, I believe, a discard for Signet Mining that was solid, like a Foxy or something. Like it was insane. They got destroyed. And then round 3 against Despia, I went first. My hand was really good. I don't think I played it optimally because it was the first time I played the deck, so I didn't end on as much disruption as I should have, and that kind of enabled them to play through it a little bit, but I had a lot of follow-up. And then I started playing on the next turn, and then I cleared their entire board and left them on no cards in hand, but they got Cartesia back in the end phase. And then they top decked Super Poly to get rid of my board. It was a huge back and forth because eventually I ran out of my entire extra deck pretty much. It was like a 40-minute game, dude. Game 2, they went first. They made Masquerade. I opened 3 Ash Blossoms, the Field Spell, and a Droll Lockbird. And then I top decked a Bell. And then on the next turn, I top decked an Imperm. Phenomenal. I don't really understand Buffalo. I will say Flame Buffalo was probably the card that underperformed the most out of all of this. It didn't feel quite ideal because it doesn't guarantee you the Gazelle, but it does provide card advantage, which is important in this deck, I think. Like that's kind of what it lives off of, right? Like if this deck goes first, it'll very consistently make its board, but your opponent will always be able to play into your board because this deck just does not have the option to make an auto win board. It doesn't have it. Your end board is Salamangreat Rage Phoenix with both traps, best case, and almost also worst case, like pretty much, right? Your opponent will always be able to play into it and they will get into a grind game, and that's where Flame Buffalo can make a huge difference because you'll have more follow-up and so on and so forth. In case you decide to cut down on Flame Buffaloes, which you can do, I think it's good to play at least one as a Signet Mining target. If you draw Signet Mining and a couple Salamangreats, you can just Signet Mining for Buffalo and get into hand traps and stuff like that way. So I would always play one. As far as Desires goes, I think it's a good card in this deck. I just don't enjoy activating a card when like I have so many one-ofs in my deck. When you already have Gazelle, you don't really need Desires, right? And if you don't have Gazelle, it's a very risky play to activate Desires, right? Because if you don't have Gazelle, Desires is usually your first action, right? If Desires is your first action, it's so risky because one Sanctuary, one Gazelle, one of each trap, one Weasel, one Jaguar, one Falco. You can't play multiples of all of those cards, right? You can play a second Jaguar, you can play a second copy of a trap or something, but like you're gonna lose out on a lot of grind game value if you banish a couple one-offs with Desires, because there's been plenty games where I needed all of those cards. I will say, I think Salamangreat Weasel drastically overperformed for me. That card was really nice. I'm considering playing more copies of that card. That card seemed very, very cool. How does this deck play around Nibiru? It does not. You could play Crossout, which would be okay. I noticed a couple times that I would get impermed on Salamangreat of Fire and I simply wouldn't have a way to Gazelle. Initially, I was like, I'm gonna draw enough Gazelles with like 3 Salamangreat of Fire, 3 Circle, 1 Gazelle. I don't need to play the full 3 copies of Signet Mining. And I did always open a way to Gazelle except for one game, the one where I drew 3 Ashes and the Field Spell. But very often, my only way to Gazelle was Salamangreat of Fire. They would simply imperm it or Ash it, and then I didn't have Gazelle, and that was painful. The last round I played against Purely, which was a tough matchup, I think. I 2-0'd it. I think it's only because they made decently large misplays. At some point in game 1, they had a 11 or 12 material X Purely Noir, which is pretty much impossible to beat. Delicious Memory attached, which meant that it had like 6,400 defense or some shit. And they were just sitting on it, and they just thought that I couldn't out it, and so they didn't activate it. And I didn't have Kurikara in it because it was game 1. I didn't scoop, I just played. Eventually, I get to a point where I have a Rage Phoenix in the extra monster zone, and I get to make a Transcode Talker under it. They don't prevent it, right? And so I get a Transcode Talker under my Rage Phoenix. And then they try to Noir the Transcode Talker, and I tell them you can't target it, right? Because it's co-linked with the Rage Phoenix. You can't target the Transcode Talker, and you can't target the Rage Phoenix anymore. Then I made a Heat Soul next to the Transcode Talker, which they could target the Heat Soul, but they didn't. And then I turned the Heat Soul and the Rage Phoenix into a Access Code Talker next to the Transcode Talker, which they couldn't target now. And because I used Rage Phoenix for Access Code, it went up to 63, plus 500 from Transcode makes 68, was able to attack over the 6,400 defense Noir. Barely, because they didn't really pay attention. So that was kind of on them. That's how I won against Purely. They should have won that game. If they just spin the Heat Soul or something, I can never out the Noir. So that's how I won game 1 against Purely after I grinded for like 35 minutes against them. And then game 2 is like 10 minutes left before we shuffle. I side deck, we shuffle, and they let me go first. That was a game where I got impermed on Salamangreat of Fire, and my hand was really bad after. I made a relink Sunlight Wolf, and then I used Will that I hard drew to bring back from the graveyard Salamangreat of Fire and another monster, Spinny, I think, just to trigger the Sunlight Wolf to add something back, and then I pass. My board is Sunlight Wolf and 2 Salamangreat monsters in defense. Their turn starts, and there's like, I don't know, 5 minutes left, 4 minutes left, I don't know exactly. They start playing, they activate my friend, they pay 500, and then they play for like 2 or 3 minutes, and their goal was to just attack one of my monsters with Happiness, destroy it by battle, half my Sunlight Wolf down to 900, and then attack it again for 1100 damage, right? The problem was that what they decided to do with the Happiness, the first attack that they made was onto Salamangreat of Fire. They half my Sunlight Wolf, and then they go to attack the Sunlight Wolf, and I use Salamangreat of Fire to destroy it in damage steps so they don't deal any damage. And then it was time. That was my locals experience, and then I got rewarded. I pulled this in my OTS packs that I got. Very nice, very cool. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I had fun at locals. I kind of miss going to locals. That's one thing I realized. It's like, it's kind of far, but I do wish I could go more often. I miss these opportunities, right? Because there's a lot of decks that I really enjoy, like this one. This is a deck that I really thoroughly enjoyed yesterday. It was a lot of fun to play this. But throughout the entire day, I noticed that, you know, this deck is like, it's fun, but it's not a meta deck right now. It's not a top tier deck. It's like tier 2 at max. Because of how competitive I am, I never really get to bring decks like this to like a YCS, right? Or like a regional even. Like for regionals, I also usually care too much to bring a deck like this. But having locals where I get to bring something like this without feeling bad about it, right? Even if I do not do well with it, it doesn't really matter that much. Yeah, I should probably go to locals more often. If you're on a budget, I do recommend trying out this deck. Just take out the Kurikaras, and I think you can have a lot of fun for a decently low budget. I mean, what are we talking here? $100 maybe without the Kurikaras? How much is an access code these days? 35? So if an access code is like 30 to 35 bucks, the Salamangreat of Fire I think is like 10 bucks. So we're looking at like 60 to 65 bucks. 2 Rage Phoenix is like 15 bucks together, probably less. Looking at 80 bucks, some staples, some of the core. Literally, without the Kurikaras, I think you're looking at around 100 bucks for a, in my opinion, deck that you can show up to locals with and do well with. Potentially even at a regional if you have a good day. It's not a bad deck. As a top tier option right now, I don't think it's top tier, but it's a good budget option. And I will say 2 things need to happen for this deck to be meta. And I think all of you can guess which the 2 things are. The first thing and the obvious thing is Gazelle needs to go to 2 or 3. It should really go up. Like, it has no business being at 1. This deck is not a problem. This deck is not going to be a problem. Even if this deck was meta, it would not be oppressive. The other thing is Arise Heart should be banned. Or Kashtira needs to stop being the best deck in the format, pretty much. Deck was a lot of fun. Hope you enjoyed this little bit of a different, like, locals recap. I know it's just locals, but, you know, I just haven't had much. This was the first time I played Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, TCG since over a month. It's been a long time. I was basically stuck in Master Duel Worlds format for way too long. I haven't played since Duelist Nexus came out. So yeah, I just wanted to share that experience. I hope you enjoyed that little bit of a recap.